Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back over 2.5 millennia to ancient Greece, where democracy was born, philosophy flourished, and your chances of making it through breakfast were surprisingly slim. Picture yourself waking up in 5th century BCE Athens, not in some sanitized history book version, but in the real deal where the air reeks of unwashed bodies, animal sacrifice, and raw sewage flowing through the streets. The sun hasn't even crested the Acropolis yet, but you're already hearing the thunderous roar of thousands of voices from the agora below, mixing with the bleating of goats being dragged to slaughter and the rhythmic pounding of blacksmiths' hammers. You probably won't survive this day, not because you're weak, but because ancient Greece was designed to kill the unprepared, the unlucky, and pretty much everyone who wasn't born into exactly the right circumstances. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment letting me know where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love seeing how this little community spans the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're jolted awake not by an alarm clock, but by the cacophonous symphony of ancient Athens stirring to life. The first thing that hits you isn't the sight, it's the smell. Imagine the most pungent combination of unwashed human bodies, animal dung, rotting fish, and burning olive oil, all mixed with the acrid smoke from countless small fires. This is your morning greeting from one of history's most celebrated civilizations. Your sleeping arrangement is a thin straw mattress on a wooden frame, if you're lucky enough to be middle class. The wealthy might have actual beds with leather strapping, while the poor sleep on the ground with nothing but a rough woolen cloak for warmth. There are no glass windows, just wooden shutters that let in both light and every sound from the street below. Privacy is a luxury concept that won't be invented for another few centuries. As you stumble toward consciousness, you realize your first life or death decision of the day. Do you venture outside to relieve yourself, or use the chamber pot that probably hasn't been emptied in days? The public toilets are communal affairs where men sit side by side on stone seats with holes, using shared sponges on sticks instead of toilet paper. The used sponges sit in buckets of salt water between uses. Women have even fewer options, often having to hold it until they can find a relatively private corner or alley. The social hierarchy hits you immediately as you peer out your window onto the street. Citizens stride by in their carefully draped chitons, their clean-shaven faces marking them as free men with rights. Slaves, and there are slaves everywhere, scurry about their tasks wearing simpler tunics, their heads often shaved to mark their status. You quickly realize that in this society, your survival depends entirely on which category you fall into, and the consequences of getting it wrong are swift and brutal. The political situation is equally treacherous. Athens might be the birthplace of democracy, but it's a democracy where only adult male citizens can participate, roughly 10% of the population. The other 90% live at the mercy of decisions they have no voice in making. Even if you're lucky enough to be a citizen, expressing the wrong opinion at the wrong time can lead to ostracism, literal banishment from the city for 10 years or worse. Historians still argue whether ancient Greek democracy was truly democratic or simply a sophisticated form of mob rule. But one thing is certain. The political climate is so volatile that alliances shift daily, and yesterday's hero can become tomorrow's exile with a single unpopular vote in the assembly. The economic reality is equally harsh. Most people live hand-to-mouth, dependent on daily wages or the success of small family businesses. There's no social safety net, no unemployment insurance, no healthcare system. If you can't work, you don't eat. If you get sick, you pray to the gods and hope for the best. The wealthy control most of the land and resources, while the poor struggle for every obol, the small silver coins that represent the difference between survival and starvation. As you prepare to face this day, You're already aware that countless decisions await you, each carrying potentially fatal consequences. Which god should you honor first? How should you dress to signal your social status without overstepping? Where can you safely eat without poisoning yourself? Who can you trust with your words, and who might betray you to gain political favor? The morning light filtering through your shutters carries both promise and threat. This is ancient Greece. Beautiful, brilliant, and absolutely merciless to those who don't know the rules of survival. Your stomach growls with a hollow ache that reminds you breakfast in ancient Greece isn't about pleasure. It's about survival. You shuffle toward your small cooking area, a corner of your dwelling where a few clay pots sit near a charcoal brazier that doubles as both stove and heater. The fuel is expensive, so most cooking happens quickly or not at all. Your breakfast options would make a modern prison cafeteria look like a five-star restaurant. The staple meal for most Greeks is a porridge called maza, essentially barley gruel mixed with water, olive oil if you're fortunate, and maybe a few olives or onions if you're feeling extravagant. The barley has been ground by hand using stone querns, a backbreaking process that leaves tiny stone particles mixed throughout the grain. Every bite means slowly wearing down your teeth on microscopic granite dust. By age 30, most Greeks have teeth ground down to nubs, assuming they haven't lost them entirely to infection. You scoop some barley meal from a large ceramic storage jar called a pithos, hoping the grain hasn't been contaminated by rats, insects, or mold. Food storage is a constant battle against vermin and decay. There's no refrigeration, no preservatives except salt, and no understanding of bacteria. That slightly sour smell coming from your grain, it could be natural fermentation, or it could be the beginning of deadly food poisoning. You'll find out in a few hours. Mixing your gruel with water from a clay amphora, you pray the water is cleaner than it looks. Most Athenians get their water from public fountains fed by springs outside the city, but by the time it reaches you, it's passed through lead pipes, sat in open containers, and been handled by countless unwashed hands. Waterborne diseases like cholera and dysentery kill thousands annually, but you don't know about germs, you blame angry gods or bad air. If you're wealthy enough to afford bread, you face different dangers. Greek bread is often adulterated with chalk, alum, or bean flour to stretch the wheat and increase profits. Bakers who get caught cheating face severe penalties, but enforcement is spotty. The bread itself is dense, coarse, and often goes stale within hours of baking. Most people dip it in watered wine, not for flavor, but because the alcohol helps kill some of the bacteria lurking in both the bread and water. Speaking of wine, it's not optional, it's essential for survival. Pure wine is considered barbaric. Civilized Greeks always mix it with water in ratios ranging from half and half to 1 part wine to 20 parts water. This practice isn't about moderation. It's about making contaminated water safer to drink. The alcohol content kills some pathogens, though not all. Many Greeks suffer from chronic low-level alcohol poisoning, which they attribute to various ailments without understanding the cause. Your morning hygiene routine would horrify modern sensibilities. There's no soap as we know it. Instead, you scrape your skin with a curved bronze tool called a strigil after rubbing yourself with olive oil. The oil supposedly draws out dirt and sweat, but mostly it just smears everything around. Bathing means visiting public baths where hundreds of people share the same water, creating perfect breeding grounds for skin diseases, fungal infections, and parasites. Dental hygiene consists of chewing on twigs or scraping your teeth with bronze picks. Toothaches are common and often fatal when they lead to systemic infections. Many Greeks have chronic bad breath, gum disease, and missing teeth by early adulthood. The wealthy might use imported spices like cinnamon to freshen their breath, but for most people, halitosis is just part of life. Historians still argue whether ancient Greeks actually understood the connection between cleanliness and health, but evidence suggests they prioritized ritual purity over practical hygiene. You might spend an hour purifying yourself before entering a temple while ignoring the festering wound on your leg that's slowly killing you with sepsis. The breakfast scene around you reveals the stark inequality of Greek society. Wealthy citizens might enjoy honey, cheese, figs, and wine with their bread, while slaves get thin barley gruel and water. The middle class, small merchants, artisans, and farmers survive on a diet that's nutritionally marginal at best. Malnutrition is so common that it's considered normal, leading to stunted growth, weakened immune systems, and shortened lifespans. Children face the worst odds. Infant mortality hovers around 30 to 40%, and many of those who survive to adulthood bear the physical marks of childhood malnutrition: bowed legs from rickets, stunted growth, and dental deformities. The lucky few born into wealthy families have access to better food, but even they face the constant threat of contamination and disease. As you finish your meager breakfast, washing down the gritty barley porridge with diluted wine that tastes faintly of vinegar, you realize this meal might be your last if you've chosen poorly. Food poisoning, contaminated water, or simply the cumulative effect of malnutrition could end your ancient Greek adventure before noon. But hunger drives you forward. There's work to be done, and in this society, not working means not eating tomorrow. With your questionable breakfast settling uneasily in your stomach, you prepare to face one of ancient Greece's most celebrated institutions, the gymnasium. But forget everything you think you know about Greek athletics from sanitized museum statues and Hollywood movies. The reality is a brutal gauntlet of violence, humiliation, and social hierarchy that could cripple or kill you before lunch. The gymnasium isn't just about physical exercise. It's the cornerstone of Greek education and social stratification. Only freeborn male citizens can participate, and your performance here determines your place in society for life. Fail to measure up, and you'll be branded a coward, excluded from political life and socially ostracized. Excel, and you might earn respect, political connections, and marriage prospects. The stakes couldn't be higher, and the methods couldn't be more dangerous. You arrive at the gymnasium complex, a sprawling facility that includes wrestling areas, running tracks, throwing fields, and bathing facilities. The first thing that hits you is the sight of dozens of completely nude men engaged in various athletic activities. Nudity in the gymnasium isn't optional. It's mandatory and ritualistic. The Greeks believe athletic nudity honors the gods and demonstrates the beauty of the human form, but it also serves a practical purpose. There's nowhere to hide weapons, padding, or protective gear. Your trainer, called a pediatribes, approaches with a long stick that he'll use to correct your form throughout the day. These trainers are often former athletes themselves, men whose bodies bear the scars of decades of brutal competition. They show no mercy to beginners, believing that pain builds character and weakness deserves punishment. A few whacks with the stick are considered light encouragement. Serious infractions earn you a beating that can leave permanent injuries. The wrestling area is where you'll spend most of your morning, and it's a scene of controlled savagery. Greek wrestling, called pale, has few rules and fewer safety measures. Competitors grapple in a sand pit, trying to throw their opponent to the ground 3 times to win. But throwing often means picking someone up and slamming them down with enough force to break bones. Dislocated shoulders, fractured ribs, and concussions are so common they're barely worth mentioning. The sand beneath your feet is mixed with oil from countless previous wrestlers, creating a slippery, gritty surface that tears skin and gets into every wound. There's no understanding of infection control. Open cuts are considered badges of honor, and wrestlers often continue competing while bleeding profusely. The sand pit becomes a breeding ground for bacteria, and many athletes develop skin infections that can turn deadly if they spread to the bloodstream. Pancration, the most extreme form of Greek combat sport, combines wrestling and boxing with almost no restrictions. Fighters can punch, kick, choke, and break joints. The only forbidden techniques are biting and eye gouging. Death in pancration is uncommon but not rare enough to prevent participation. Champions are celebrated as heroes, but for every champion, dozens of competitors suffer permanent disabilities or career-ending injuries. Boxing presents its own horrors. Greek boxers wrap their hands and forearms with leather strips called hymantes. But these aren't protective gear. They're weapons designed to inflict maximum damage. Later versions include metal studs or spikes. Fights continue until one competitor can no longer defend himself, often meaning unconsciousness or severe injury. Broken noses, shattered jaws, and traumatic brain injuries are occupational hazards. The running events might seem safer, but they carry their own risks. The stadium race, a sprint the length of the stadium, is run on hard-packed earth or stone. Runners compete barefoot, and falls at high speed result in severe abrasions, broken bones, and head injuries. The longer dialos and dalikos races test endurance to dangerous extremes, with competitors sometimes collapsing from heat exhaustion or cardiac stress. Historians still argue whether the extreme violence in Greek athletics was intentional character building or simply reflected the brutal realities of ancient warfare, but either way, the gymnasium functions as a controlled battlefield where young men prove their worthiness through suffering. The social dynamics add another layer of danger. Wealthy young men often hire the best trainers and receive superior nutrition, giving them significant advantages over poorer competitors. But class distinctions can also lead to targeted violence. A wealthy boy who humiliates a poor but skilled wrestler might find himself the victim of an accident during the next bout. The educational component of gymnasium life involves not just physical training but also music, poetry, and rhetoric. However, even these seemingly genteel activities carry risks. Philosophical discussions can lead to accusations of impiety or corrupting youth, charges that carry severe penalties. Musical competitions become fierce contests where losing means public humiliation and social exile. The bathhouse after training is almost as dangerous as the exercises themselves. Hundreds of sweaty, oil-covered bodies share the same water in large stone basins. The water is rarely changed and never heated properly, creating ideal conditions for spreading skin diseases, intestinal parasites, and respiratory infections. The strigils used to scrape off oil and dirt are often shared between users without cleaning, spreading infections from person to person. As you stumble away from your first gymnasium session, your body is a map of bruises, cuts, and strains. Your muscles scream in protest, your skin burns from abrasions, and you're beginning to understand why so many young Greek men never make it to their 30s. But you'll be back tomorrow because in ancient Greece, physical courage isn't optional, and the gymnasium is where that courage is forged through pain, blood, and the constant threat of permanent injury or death. Your bruised body has barely recovered from the gymnasium when you're summoned to participate in the crown jewel of Athenian civilization, democracy itself. But as you make your way toward the Nix Hill where the assembly meets, you quickly realize that Athenian democracy isn't the noble institution you've heard about in history class. It's a volatile, dangerous political arena where one wrong word can mean exile, execution, or something worse. The ecclesia, the citizen assembly, meets roughly 40 times per year, and attendance isn't optional if you want to maintain your standing as a citizen. Missing too many meetings marks you as politically unreliable, which in Athens is almost as dangerous as being labeled a traitor. You join the stream of roughly 6,000 male citizens trudging up the hill, each carrying a small pottery shard called an ostracon, a voting token that could seal someone's fate before the day is over. The assembly area is a natural amphitheater carved into the hillside, with stone seats arranged in semicircles facing a speaker's platform. But comfort isn't the priority, control is. Scythian archers, essentially foreign mercenaries, patrol the perimeter with ropes dipped in red paint. If you try to leave early, they'll mark you with the paint, identifying you as someone who abandoned their civic duty. The fine for being caught with red paint is substantial, and the social shame is worse. The first agenda item demonstrates just how precarious political life can be. A citizen named Cleophon is being accused of leading the people astray with his recent speeches about military strategy. In most societies, political disagreement means debate, compromise, or at worst, losing an election. In Athens, it can mean death. The assembly has the power to impose immediate exile, confiscate property, or even order execution without what we'd recognize as due process. The speaking order is determined by lot, and when your name is drawn, your heart sinks. You're expected to address the assembly on matters of war, finance, and foreign policy, topics where ignorance can be fatal and expertise can be equally dangerous. Speak too knowledgeably about military affairs, and you might be suspected of plotting a coup. Show too much sympathy for other city-states, and you could be accused of treason. Remain silent, and you'll be marked as a political coward. Your speech goes reasonably well until you mention that perhaps Athens should consider negotiating with Sparta rather than continuing the endless warfare that's bleeding the city dry. The reaction is immediate and terrifying. Thousands of voices erupt in angry shouts. Some citizens leap to their feet with clenched fists, and you realize you've just committed a potentially career-ending mistake. In Athenian democracy, suggesting peace with enemies is often treated as defeatism or outright collaboration. The ostracismos, the famous ostracism process, begins almost immediately. Citizens write names on their pottery shards, voting to exile someone from the city for 10 years without trial, explanation, or appeal. The person with the most votes is banished, loses all property rights, and faces death if they return early. What makes this particularly terrifying is that you don't have to commit any crime to be ostracized. Being too popular, too wealthy, too influential, or simply too annoying can make you a target. As the ostraca are collected and counted, you watch prominent citizens nervously eyeing each other, trying to gauge who might be this session's victim. Aristides the Just was ostracized simply because people got tired of hearing about his virtue. Themistocles, the hero of Salamis, was driven out by political rivals who feared his influence. Even Pericles faced multiple ostracism attempts, surviving only through careful political maneuvering and strategic alliances. The voting process itself reveals the brutal mathematics of Athenian democracy. With only about 30,000 total citizens eligible to vote, and requiring a quorum of 6,000 for ostracism, a relatively small organized group can destroy anyone they choose. Political factions operate like criminal organizations, trading votes, making threats, and orchestrating campaigns of personal destruction against their enemies. Historians still argue whether ostracism was designed to prevent tyranny or simply became a tool for tyranny itself, but the psychological impact on participants is undeniable. Every citizen lives in fear of making enemies, expressing unpopular opinions, or standing out too much from the crowd. The result is a society where conformity is survival and innovation is dangerous. The financial pressures of democracy add another layer of risk. Wealthy citizens are expected to fund public works, military expeditions, and religious festivals through a system called liturgies, essentially mandatory donations that can bankrupt a family overnight. Refuse, and you'll be labeled anti-democratic. Comply, and you might spend yourself into poverty trying to maintain political favor. The Assembly's foreign policy decisions often mean life or death for thousands of people, including yourself. A vote for war means you might be conscripted for military service whether you want to fight or not. A vote for peace might be seen as cowardice or treason. Trade agreements affect food supplies, taxation impacts your livelihood, and military alliances determine whether Athens faces siege, invasion, or destruction. The session ends with Cleophon's exile by a margin of just a few hundred votes. You watch him walk away from the only home he's ever known, knowing he has hours to gather whatever possessions he can carry before being escorted to the city limits by armed guards. His property will be seized, his family disgraced, and his name struck from citizenship rolls. 10 years from now, if he's still alive and if the political winds have shifted, he might be allowed to return as a broken, impoverished stranger. As you descend the Nix Hill, you realize that participating in Athenian democracy means accepting that your fate rests in the hands of thousands of people who might decide your future based on a single speech, a personal grudge, or simply the mood of the moment. Tomorrow there will be another assembly, another vote, another chance for someone's world to end with the counting of pottery shards. Fresh from the political minefield of the assembly, you face an even more perilous challenge, navigating the religious obligations that permeate every moment of Greek life. But these aren't the sanitized, philosophical deities you might imagine from later Roman adaptations. The Greek gods are violent, petty, and actively murderous beings who demand constant appeasement, and failing to honor them properly doesn't just risk bad luck. It invites divine retribution that can destroy you, your family, and your entire city. Your first stop is the household shrine in your modest dwelling, where small clay figurines of various gods watch over your daily activities with what feels like malevolent interest. The morning libation isn't optional. You pour wine, olive oil, or honey onto the ground while reciting prayers you learned as a child. But choosing which god to honor first is a potentially fatal decision. Slight Athena in favor of Aphrodite, and you might find yourself making catastrophic military decisions. Ignore Dionysus during his festival season, and madness could follow. The gods are omnipresent, omnipotent, and utterly unpredictable. Walking through Athens, you're constantly reminded that the divine realm intersects with mortal life in dangerous ways. Every street corner has its shrine, every crossroads its offerings, every doorway its protective amulet. The city is dotted with sacred groves where specific rituals must be performed or terrible consequences follow. Citizens whisper about families who cut down sacred olive trees and were struck by lightning, or merchants who cheated at temple markets and were found dead under mysterious circumstances. The major temples dominate the cityscape like fortresses of divine power. The Parthenon, gleaming white marble sacred to Athena, isn't just a building. It's the goddess's actual dwelling place on earth. Inside, her massive gold and ivory statue watches with eyes that some swear move to follow visitors. The temple treasury holds offerings worth more than most small cities, but stealing from the gods is literally unthinkable. Those who've tried have been found torn apart by wild animals, struck down by plague, or simply vanished without explanation. Animal sacrifice is the cornerstone of Greek religious practice, and it's a bloody, messy affair that would traumatize modern sensibilities. You join a procession leading a bull to the altar of Zeus, watching as priests in white robes approach the massive animal with sharp bronze knives. The bull seems to sense its fate, bellowing and struggling against the ropes that bind it. This isn't a quick, humane death. It's a ritualistic slaughter designed to please gods who apparently enjoy watching creatures suffer. The sacrifice begins with elaborate prayers and offerings of wine and barley. Then comes the moment of truth. The priest draws his knife across the bull's throat in a single, practiced motion. Blood spurts everywhere, spattering the altar, the priests, and the front rows of worshippers. The animal thrashes and kicks as its life drains away, its death throes interpreted by priests as either divine acceptance or rejection of the offering. If the gods are displeased, the entire ritual must be repeated with another animal, and another until the signs are favorable. The smell of blood, burning meat, and incense creates a nauseating cloud that hangs over the temple precinct. Flies swarm the altar area, and the ground is permanently stained dark with the blood of thousands of sacrificed animals. This is religion as practiced by people who believe their gods are literal, physical beings with human emotions and superhuman power, gods who can and will kill mortals who displease them. The distribution of sacrificial meat follows strict social hierarchies that reinforce your place in the pecking order. Priests get the choicest cuts, wealthy citizens receive substantial portions, and the poor scramble for scraps. Slaves and foreigners often get nothing at all. But even receiving meat carries obligations. You must eat it with proper reverence, share it appropriately, and dispose of bones and scraps according to ritual requirements. Mess up the protocol and you risk offending both gods and neighbors. Festival seasons bring their own terrors. The Dionysiac festivals aren't quaint celebrations of wine and harvest. They're frenzied orgies of intoxication, violence, and religious ecstasy that regularly result in deaths, injuries, and social scandals. Participants tear apart live animals with their bare hands, drink themselves into dangerous stupors, and engage in ritual behaviors that blur the line between worship and madness. Refusing to participate marks you as impious, but participating risks your sanity, your health, and your life. The Eleusinian mysteries represent the pinnacle of Greek religious experience, but they're also incredibly dangerous. Initiates swear binding oaths never to reveal what happens during the secret ceremonies, and the penalty for breaking these oaths is death, not metaphorical death, but actual execution carried out by fellow citizens who consider oath-breaking a crime against the cosmic order. Even accidentally witnessing part of the mysteries without proper initiation can result in immediate execution. Historians still argue whether the average Greek truly believed the gods would personally intervene in human affairs, but the evidence suggests most people lived in constant fear of divine punishment. Plague, earthquake, military defeat, crop failure, and personal misfortune are all attributed to religious transgressions, creating a society where everyone constantly monitors their behavior for potential impiety. The oracle at Delphi adds another layer of religious complexity and danger. Her prophecies shape military campaigns, political decisions, and personal choices throughout the Greek world. But interpreting her cryptic pronouncements wrong can lead to catastrophic consequences. Ask King Croesus, who misunderstood a prophecy and lost his entire kingdom. Even making the journey to consult the oracle is dangerous, involving mountain travel through bandit-infested territory and the risk of receiving prophecies you're not prepared to hear. As evening approaches and you complete your religious obligations for the day, you realize you've navigated a spiritual minefield where every prayer, every offering, every ritual gesture carries the potential for divine retribution. The gods of ancient Greece aren't benevolent guardians. They're cosmic bullies with unlimited power and very little patience for human mistakes. As you navigate the religious complexities of your ancient Greek day, you can't avoid confronting the most uncomfortable truth about this celebrated civilization. It runs entirely on slave labor. Everywhere you look, enslaved human beings perform the tasks that make Greek culture, democracy, and philosophy possible. But this isn't the distant, sanitized slavery you might read about in textbooks. It's immediate, brutal, and so thoroughly integrated into daily life that questioning it would mark you as dangerously insane. Walking through the agora, you pass dozens of slaves going about their assigned tasks with the resigned efficiency of people who know that resistance means death. The slave market operates openly in a corner of the marketplace, where human beings are examined like livestock. Buyers checking teeth, muscles, and scars to determine value and suitability for different types of work. The prices vary wildly. A skilled craftsman might cost several years' wages for an average citizen, while war captives are sold in bulk at bargain rates. The demographics of slavery in Athens are staggering. Out of a total population of roughly 300,000 people, anywhere from 100,000 to 150,000 are slaves, essentially 1 out of every 2 or 3 people you encounter. They're not a separate class living in distant quarters. They're integrated into every household, workshop, farm, and public building. The democracy you participated in this morning, the gymnasium where you trained, the religious ceremonies you attended, all of these institutions depend entirely on slave labor to function. Your own modest household includes at least 2 or 3 slaves, assuming you're a middle-class citizen. There's the domestic slave who prepares meals, cleans, and manages household supplies, probably a woman captured during one of Athens' many military campaigns. The workshop slave who assists with whatever trade or craft you practice, perhaps a skilled metalworker or potter sold to pay his former master's debts. And the personal attendant who accompanies you in public, carries your belongings, and serves as a visible marker of your social status. The treatment of these slaves reveals the casual brutality that underlies Greek civilization. Physical punishment is not only legal but expected. A master who doesn't beat disobedient slaves is considered weak and foolish. The punishments range from simple beatings with sticks or whips to more elaborate tortures designed to break resistance without permanently damaging valuable property. Branding is common, especially for slaves who attempt to escape, marking them permanently as runaways. Sexual exploitation is so routine it's barely worth mentioning in most accounts. Male and female slaves have no legal right to refuse their master's sexual demands, and the children born from these unions automatically become slaves themselves. The legal system explicitly states that slaves cannot be raped because they have no legal right to consent or refuse. They are property, not people, in the eyes of Greek law. The working conditions for most slaves would violate every modern standard of human decency. In the silver mines at Laurium, thousands of slaves work in tunnels so narrow they can barely crawl, extracting or in stifling heat with primitive tools. The mortality rate is astronomical. Most mining slaves don't survive more than a few years of this treatment. Their bodies are simply replaced with fresh captives from Athens' constant military campaigns. Household slaves face different but equally dehumanizing conditions. They work from before dawn until after sunset, sleep on hard floors or in cramped quarters, and eat whatever scraps remain after the family finishes their meals. They have no privacy, no personal possessions, no control over their daily activities. A domestic slave might spend decades serving the same family, watching children grow up while knowing their own children, if they're allowed to have any, will face the same fate. The psychological impact of slavery extends beyond the slaves themselves to warp the entire society. Free citizens develop a pathological dependence on slave labor that makes them incapable of performing basic tasks. Wealthy Athenians literally cannot dress themselves, prepare their own food, or navigate the city without slave assistance. This creates a strange paradox where the masters become helpless dependents of the people they claim to own. The economic logic of slavery means that technological innovation is actively discouraged. Why develop labor-saving devices when human labor costs almost nothing? Why improve working conditions when workers are replaceable? Greek society stagnates technologically because slave labor removes any incentive to develop more efficient methods of production. Historians still argue whether ancient slavery was somehow different or less harsh than later forms, but the evidence suggests that Greek slaves faced exactly the same dehumanization, violence, and exploitation as enslaved people throughout history. The main difference is that Greek slavery was so thoroughly normalized that even philosophers like Aristotle argued it was natural and necessary. The manumission process, freeing slaves, reveals just how thoroughly the institution corrupts moral thinking. Masters occasionally free slaves as rewards for exceptional service, but freed slaves remain legally inferior to born citizens. They can't vote, hold office, or marry citizens. Their children inherit this second-class status, creating permanent castes of people marked by their family history of enslavement. Some slaves manage to earn money through skilled work and eventually purchase their freedom, but this process can take decades and often fails when masters simply refuse to honor their agreements. A slave who accumulates enough wealth to buy freedom might find their master raising the price, selling them to someone else, or simply confiscating their savings as punishment for getting above their station. The military uses slaves as support personnel, baggage carriers, and even auxiliary fighters, but they're considered expendable cannon fodder rather than soldiers. During sieges, slave lives are sacrificed to preserve citizen lives without a second thought. Their deaths don't count in casualty reports, and their families, if they have any, receive no compensation or recognition. As your day in ancient Greece continues, you can't escape the reality that every comfort, every convenience, every moment of leisure is built on the systematic destruction of human dignity and freedom. The beautiful temples, the philosophical discussions, the democratic assemblies, all of it depends on treating vast numbers of human beings as objects to be owned, used, and discarded when they're no longer profitable. Your body is starting to feel the cumulative effects of your ancient Greek adventure. Those bruises from the gymnasium are throbbing, that questionable breakfast is causing intestinal distress, and you've developed a nasty cut on your hand from handling rough pottery at the market. Time to seek medical attention, which in ancient Greece means entering a world of treatments so barbaric they're more likely to kill you than cure you. The local physician, or iatros, greets you in his modest clinic with tools that look more suited for torture than healing. His medical kit includes bronze knives of various sizes, iron hooks for extracting foreign objects, primitive forceps, and a collection of herbs and powders that smell like decomposing vegetation mixed with animal waste. There are no sterilization procedures, no understanding of infection, and no concept that invisible organisms might cause disease. Your examination begins with the doctor studying your urine color, taste, and smell. Yes, he actually tastes it, then makes pronouncements about the balance of your bodily humors based on its flavor profile. Greek medicine is built on the theory that 4 humors, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, must remain in perfect balance for health. Any illness represents an imbalance that must be corrected through increasingly drastic interventions. The physician decides your symptoms indicate an excess of blood, which means you need immediate bloodletting. He produces a bronze knife with practiced efficiency, making deep cuts in your forearm to allow blood to flow freely into a clay bowl. There's no way to measure how much blood you're losing, no understanding that blood loss can be fatal, and no concept of blood pressure or circulation. The cutting tool hasn't been cleaned since the last patient, creating perfect conditions for transferring diseases between victims. As your blood pools in the bowl, the doctor examines its color and consistency with the same intensity he applied to your urine. Too dark means an excess of melancholic humors. Too bright indicates too much sanguine temperament. He might decide you need to lose more blood, or he might switch to alternative treatments that are somehow even worse than controlled bleeding. Cupping is another popular treatment that involves heating bronze or clay cups and placing them on your skin to create suction. The partial vacuum draws blood to the surface, creating painful welts and sometimes pulling skin so hard it tears. Combined with small cuts, cupping can remove substantial amounts of blood while creating numerous wounds that almost inevitably become infected in the unsanitary conditions of ancient medical practice. Your intestinal problems from breakfast earn you a prescription for hellebore, a plant extract so toxic it's also used as rat poison. The dosage guidelines are vague at best. Too little supposedly won't cure you, while too much will definitely kill you. Greek physicians have no standardized measurements, no quality control, and no understanding of individual differences in drug tolerance. Many patients die from their medications rather than their original illnesses. The doctor's surgical procedures would make a modern horror movie look tame. Trepanation, drilling holes in the skull, is a common treatment for headaches, seizures, mental illness, and head injuries. The patient remains conscious throughout the procedure as the physician uses bronze or iron tools to slowly bore through bone, often causing massive bleeding, brain damage, or death from infection. The survival rate is perhaps 1 in 10, but it's considered advanced medical science. Cataract surgery involves pushing the clouded lens back into the eye using sharp bronze needles, a procedure that frequently results in complete blindness, severe infection, or both. Dental extractions are performed without anesthesia using crude bronze forceps that often shatter teeth rather than removing them cleanly, leaving fragments to cause ongoing infections and abscesses. Wound treatment consists of applying various poultices made from animal dung, rotting meat, moldy bread, and decomposing vegetation. Substances we now know are crawling with dangerous bacteria. Greek physicians believe that pus formation is a good sign, indicating the body is expelling evil humors, so they actively encourage infection rather than preventing it. The pharmaceutical arsenal includes substances that are genuinely helpful mixed with others that are absolutely deadly. Willow bark contains compounds similar to aspirin and can reduce pain and fever, but it's often combined with mercury, lead compounds, or arsenic-based preparations that cause heavy metal poisoning. Opium is available for severe pain, but dosages are so inconsistent that overdoses are common. Women's medical care reveals additional horrors specific to female anatomy and Greek attitudes toward women's bodies. Gynecological problems are treated with fumigation, essentially smoking the vaginal area with burning herbs and chemicals. More serious conditions might warrant inserting various objects soaked in wine, vinegar, or herbal extracts. Childbirth complications are often handled by reaching into the birth canal with unwashed hands to manually manipulate the baby, a practice that kills both mothers and infants through infection and trauma. Mental illness is attributed to divine punishment, demonic possession, or severe humor imbalances. Treatments include prolonged confinement, severe beatings to drive out evil spirits, forced consumption of toxic substances, and exposure to extreme temperatures. Many mentally ill individuals are simply abandoned by their families or sold into slavery, where their conditions worsen rapidly under brutal treatment. Historians still argue whether Greek medicine represented an advancement over earlier practices or simply codified superstition into systematic harm, but patient outcomes suggest the latter. Life expectancy for someone requiring serious medical intervention drops dramatically, and many conditions that are easily treatable today were essentially death sentences in ancient Greece. The cost of medical treatment adds insult to injury. Physicians charge substantial fees for their services, often demanding payment upfront before beginning treatment. Poor families frequently bankrupt themselves trying to save sick relatives, only to watch them die anyway from complications caused by the treatments themselves. As you stumble away from your medical consultation, bloodied, poisoned, and significantly poorer, you realize that illness in ancient Greece isn't just a health problem. It's a potential death sentence delivered by the very people claiming to help you. Your best hope for recovery isn't medical intervention, but simply avoiding doctors altogether and hoping your body can heal itself despite the damage they've already inflicted. As you navigate the dangerous medical landscape of ancient Greece, you can't help but notice that half the population faces challenges so severe they make your own struggles seem manageable by comparison. Greek women exist in a state of legal, social, and physical restriction so complete that survival itself becomes a daily achievement worthy of recognition. If you think ancient Greek life is difficult as a male citizen, try imagining it as a woman, where every aspect of existence is controlled by men who view you as barely more valuable than livestock. The legal status of women in ancient Greece is simple to understand. They have none. A woman cannot own property, conduct business, represent herself in court, or make any significant decision about her own life. From birth to death, she remains under the legal guardianship of men. First her father, then her husband, and finally her sons if she's widowed. She is literally property that can be transferred between male relatives like a valuable vase or piece of furniture. Marriage in ancient Greece isn't a romantic partnership, but a business transaction designed to produce legitimate heirs and strengthen family alliances. Girls are typically married between ages 12 and 15 to men who might be twice their age or older. The bride has no say in choosing her husband. That decision belongs to her father, who negotiates terms with the prospective groom's family like he's selling livestock. The dowry she brings to the marriage becomes her husband's property, though he's theoretically obligated to use it for her support. The wedding ceremony itself reveals the brutal reality of women's lives. The bride is literally given away by her father in a transaction that transfers ownership from one man to another. There's no pretense that her feelings matter, no consultation about her preferences, and no legal mechanism for her to refuse the arrangement. Wedding night rape is not only legal but expected. A husband has unlimited sexual access to his wife regardless of her consent or physical condition. Pregnancy and childbirth transform women into walking death sentences. Without modern medical knowledge or sanitary conditions, maternal mortality rates hover around 10 to 15% per birth. Since women are expected to produce multiple children, preferably sons, to continue the family line, most women face these deadly odds repeatedly throughout their reproductive years. Many Greek women die before age 30 from complications related to pregnancy, childbirth, or repeated miscarriages. The birthing process itself is a nightmare of pain and infection. Women give birth attended by female relatives and perhaps a midwife, but medical intervention is primitive and often harmful. Difficult births might require manual manipulation that causes severe internal injuries, while retained placentas or excessive bleeding frequently prove fatal. Postpartum infections run rampant in unsanitary conditions, turning what should be a joyful occasion into a fight for survival. Infant mortality compounds the tragedy of women's reproductive lives. Roughly 30 to 40% of children die before their 5th birthday, meaning women endure the physical trauma and mortal danger of childbirth only to watch many of their babies succumb to disease, malnutrition, or accident. The emotional toll is devastating, but Greek culture expects women to accept these losses stoically while continuing to produce more children. The domestic sphere, supposedly women's domain, is actually a prison with invisible bars. Respectable women rarely leave their homes except for religious festivals, and even then they're accompanied by male relatives or trusted slaves. Shopping, socializing, conducting business, or simply walking through the city alone marks a woman as either a slave, a foreigner, or a prostitute. The house itself is divided into male and female sections, with women confined to interior rooms that receive little light or fresh air. Women's education is deliberately limited to prevent them from developing ideas above their station. While boys attend school and gymnasium, girls learn only domestic skills: weaving, cooking, basic arithmetic for household management, and enough reading to follow religious texts. Higher education, philosophy, rhetoric, and other intellectual pursuits are strictly forbidden, as educated women are considered dangerous to social order. The economic powerlessness of women creates additional layers of vulnerability. Since they can't own property or conduct business independently, women depend entirely on male relatives for survival. Widowhood often means destitution unless her husband's family chooses to support her, and divorce, which only men can initiate, leaves women with no legal recourse or financial resources. Many divorced or widowed women end up as virtual beggars, dependent on charity from relatives who may or may not provide adequate support. Religious life offers women their only legitimate public role, but even this supposed privilege comes with restrictions and dangers. Women can serve as priestesses in certain cults, participate in female-only festivals, and maintain household shrines, but their religious activities are heavily regulated by male authorities. Some religious festivals involve dangerous practices like climbing steep mountains, handling venomous snakes, or consuming psychoactive substances that can cause injury or death. The sexual double standard creates impossible situations for women's survival. They're expected to remain chaste and faithful while their husbands freely visit prostitutes, maintain mistresses, and engage in sexual relationships with slaves or younger men. A woman accused of adultery faces severe punishment including divorce, loss of children, social exile, and sometimes death, while men face no consequences for their extramarital activities. Violence against women is not only legal but socially acceptable. Husbands can beat their wives for any reason or no reason at all, and domestic violence is considered a private family matter rather than a crime. Women have no legal recourse against abusive husbands, no shelters to flee to, and no social support systems to help them escape dangerous situations. Many women endure decades of physical and sexual abuse with no hope of relief except death. Historians still argue whether some Greek women found ways to exercise informal influence within these restrictive systems, but the overwhelming evidence suggests that female survival in ancient Greece required exceptional luck, robust health, and the protection of benevolent male relatives, all factors completely beyond women's control. The contrast between male and female experiences in ancient Greece is so stark it's almost like describing two different civilizations. While men navigate political assemblies, gymnasiums, and philosophical schools, women struggle simply to survive pregnancy, avoid fatal domestic violence, and maintain enough physical health to fulfill their biological functions. For half the population, ancient Greece isn't a cradle of democracy and culture. It's a carefully constructed system designed to extract maximum reproductive value from female bodies while denying them any agency over their own lives. Your evening entertainment beckons as the sun begins its descent toward the Aegean horizon, but Greek theater isn't the refined cultural experience you might expect. The dramatic performances that will supposedly elevate your soul and expand your mind are actually political minefields where a single misinterpreted line or poorly timed applause can mark you as a traitor, subversive, or enemy of the state. Welcome to theater as a blood sport, where the real drama happens in the audience and the consequences can be fatal. The Theater of Dionysus, carved into the southern slope of the Acropolis, holds roughly 17,000 spectators packed onto stone benches in a semicircle that amplifies both sound and social tensions. Your seating position immediately broadcasts your social status to everyone present. Citizens sit in the front sections, foreigners and slaves are relegated to the back, and women, if they're allowed to attend at all, are segregated in special areas where their presence won't corrupt the moral atmosphere. The crowd around you is already drunk before the performance begins, having consumed substantial amounts of wine as part of the Dionysiac festival atmosphere. But this isn't cheerful intoxication. It's the dangerous kind that turns minor disagreements into violent confrontations. Thousands of intoxicated men packed into tight quarters, many carrying knives as everyday tools, create conditions where theatrical criticism can quickly escalate into bloodshed. The play opens with a chorus chanting about the glorious victories of Athens over its enemies, but you quickly realize that every line carries multiple layers of political meaning. When the chorus praises wise leadership, are they supporting the current government or making subtle criticisms? When they mention foreign threats, are they referring to Sparta, Persia, or political factions within Athens itself? Your reaction to these lines is being watched and evaluated by fellow citizens who might report suspicious responses to political authorities. The protagonist, played by an actor in an elaborate mask, begins a speech about the dangers of tyranny that draws thunderous applause from some sections of the audience, while others remain pointedly silent. You realize that applauding too enthusiastically might mark you as anti-democratic, while failing to applaud could suggest sympathy for authoritarian rule. Every gesture, every facial expression, every vocal response becomes a political statement that could have lasting consequences. Greek tragedies are supposed to explore timeless themes of fate, justice, and human suffering, but in practice they're thinly veiled commentaries on current events and political figures. The tragic hero's downfall might represent a recently ostracized politician, while the chorus's warnings about hubris could be directed at specific military commanders or wealthy citizens. Missing these references marks you as politically naive, but understanding them too well might suggest dangerous levels of political sophistication. The violence on stage is graphic and realistic in ways that would shock modern audiences. When characters die, they die messily, with fake blood spurting from concealed bladders and actors writhing in convincing death agonies. But the real violence often erupts in the audience when different political factions interpret scenes differently. Fistfights break out over dramatic interpretations, and sometimes spectators are injured or killed in melees that spill out of the theater and into the surrounding streets. Comedy performances present even greater dangers because Greek comic poets enjoy almost unlimited freedom to mock political figures, religious practices, and social conventions. Aristophanes' comedies regularly feature thinly disguised portrayals of prominent citizens engaged in sexual perversions, financial corruption, or military cowardice. Laughing at the wrong jokes can suggest agreement with seditious ideas, while failing to laugh might indicate excessive sympathy for the targets of ridicule. The audience participation expected at comic performances creates additional opportunities for political missteps. Spectators are encouraged to shout responses, make crude comments, and even throw objects at the actors. But your comments become part of the permanent record of your political opinions, and fellow citizens remember who said what about whom. A poorly chosen heckle during a comedy can haunt you for years in political and business dealings. Religious elements woven throughout Greek drama add another layer of danger to theatrical attendance. Plays begin and end with prayers and sacrifices to Dionysus, and failing to participate properly can mark you as impious. But the religious content itself often contains subtle criticisms of traditional beliefs or support for mystery religions that some consider subversive. Your reaction to religious scenes is scrutinized as carefully as your response to political content. The competitive aspect of Greek theater transforms artistic appreciation into factional warfare. Different playwrights represent different political and social viewpoints, and supporting the wrong dramatist can have serious consequences for your reputation and safety. Wealthy citizens sponsor productions as a form of political advertisement, so applauding a play means endorsing its financial backer and whatever political agenda they represent. Historians still argue whether Greek theater was primarily artistic expression or political propaganda, but the evidence suggests it functioned as both simultaneously, creating a cultural experience where aesthetic judgment and political loyalty became indistinguishable. The festival atmosphere that surrounds theatrical performances includes drinking contests, sexual license, and temporary suspension of normal social rules, but these apparent freedoms create new dangers. Behavior that's acceptable during Dionysiac festivals might be remembered and used against you during more sober moments. Political enemies can use your festival conduct as evidence of moral unfitness for civic responsibility. The aftermath of theatrical performances often proves more dangerous than the shows themselves. Audience members continue debating dramatic interpretations in taverns, private homes, and public spaces, and these discussions frequently lead to accusations of impiety, sedition, or moral corruption. A casual comment about a character's motivation can be twisted into evidence of treasonous thinking or religious skepticism. As the performance ends and you file out of the theater with thousands of other spectators, many of whom are drunk, politically agitated, and armed with various sharp objects, you realize that attending Greek drama means surviving not just the artistic experience but the social and political consequences that follow. Tomorrow, people will remember not just what you saw, but how you reacted, what you said, and whose side you seem to support in the ongoing cultural wars that determine who lives, who dies, and who gets ostracized from the only home they've ever known. Your theatrical evening has barely ended when a herald arrives at your door with news that makes your blood run cold. Athens is mobilizing for another military campaign, and your name has been selected for hoplite service. In ancient Greece, military duty isn't optional, voluntary, or safe. It's a brutal system that transforms ordinary citizens into heavily armored killing machines expected to fight in one of history's most lethal military formations, where survival depends on the courage of strangers and cowardice brings dishonor worse than death. The hoplite phalanx represents the pinnacle of Greek military innovation, but from a soldier's perspective, it's a carefully orchestrated suicide machine. You'll stand shoulder to shoulder with 7 other ranks of heavily armed men, each carrying a bronze-tipped spear 9 feet long and a circular shield weighing 15 pounds. The formation moves as a single unit, advancing toward enemy lines at walking pace while maintaining perfect alignment. Break formation and everyone dies. Show cowardice, and you'll be executed by your own comrades. Your military equipment costs roughly equivalent to a year's wages for an average citizen, and you're expected to provide it yourself. The bronze cuirass that protects your torso weighs 30 pounds and restricts movement so severely that you can barely bend at the waist. The bronze helmet limits your vision to a narrow slit and muffles sound so effectively that battlefield communication becomes nearly impossible. Your greaves, bronze shin guards, prevent normal walking and make running virtually impossible once you're fully armed. The aspes, your circular shield, becomes both salvation and burden during combat. Made of bronze-covered wood with leather backing, it weighs enough to exhaust your shield arm within minutes of active fighting. But dropping your shield means exposing not just yourself but the man fighting beside you, whose life depends on your shield protecting his right side while his shield protects your left. The famous Spartan mother's command to come back with your shield or on it isn't motivational speaking. It's a death threat disguised as maternal advice. Training for hoplite warfare involves months of brutal preparation that kills almost as many men as actual combat. You'll spend hours each day drilling formations while wearing full armor in the Mediterranean heat, leading to heat exhaustion, dehydration, and cardiac stress that claims lives regularly. The physical conditioning requires developing muscles and stamina that most civilian occupations don't demand, and many would-be hoplites suffer permanent injuries during training exercises. The psychological preparation is equally devastating. Hoplite combat is intensely personal and horrifically violent. You'll be close enough to see your enemy's eyes as you drive a bronze spear point through his body, close enough to smell his fear and feel his blood spray across your face. The training includes desensitization exercises designed to overcome natural human reluctance to kill, but these procedures often leave psychological scars that persist long after military service ends. Your first battle reveals the true horror of hoplite warfare. The phalanx advances with mechanical precision until it crashes into the enemy formation with a sound like thunder. Bronze spear points punch through armor, flesh, and bone while men scream, curse, and die within arm's reach. The front ranks suffer casualty rates approaching 50% in major battles, and retreat isn't possible once combat begins. You're literally trapped between enemy spears and your own comrades pushing forward from behind. The othismos, the shoving match that follows initial spear combat, transforms warfare into a massive rugby scrum where men push against their shields while stabbing with short swords at any exposed flesh they can reach. Wounded men fall and are trampled by both sides, their screams adding to the cacophony of clashing bronze and shouted commands. The ground becomes slippery with blood, making footing treacherous and falls potentially fatal. Combat injuries in hoplite warfare are particularly gruesome because bronze weapons cause massive trauma when they penetrate armor. A spear thrust that punches through a bronze cuirass carries bronze fragments into the wound, virtually guaranteeing infection even if the initial injury isn't immediately fatal. Sword cuts through inadequately protected limbs often result in traumatic amputations that lead to rapid death from blood loss. The aftermath of hoplite battles presents its own horrors. Wounded men lie scattered across the battlefield, many still alive but unable to move due to spinal injuries, shattered limbs, or abdominal wounds. Medical care is primitive and often fatal. Battlefield surgeons might attempt to extract bronze spear points or bronze sword fragments, but infection kills most wounded warriors within days of surviving the initial trauma. Military campaigns involve months of marching through hostile territory where disease, starvation, and guerrilla attacks claim more lives than pitched battles. The logistics of feeding and supplying thousands of armed men strain ancient transportation systems beyond their limits, leading to chronic shortages of food, water, and medical supplies. Many hoplites die from dysentery, malaria, or simple exhaustion long before they ever see combat. Naval warfare adds additional layers of danger for Greeks unlucky enough to serve as Marines aboard warships. Trireme combat involves ramming enemy vessels at high speed, often resulting in both ships sinking simultaneously. Marines fight desperate boarding actions on slippery decks while the ship beneath them takes on water and threatens to drag everyone to the bottom of the Mediterranean. Historians still argue whether the hoplite system was designed for efficiency or intimidation, but casualty rates suggest it achieved both goals through sheer brutality. The psychological impact on survivors creates a warrior culture where violence becomes the default solution to political and social problems. The social pressures surrounding military service make cowardice literally unthinkable. A hoplite who abandons his position in battle faces immediate execution if caught, while those who show insufficient enthusiasm for combat are marked as unreliable and excluded from political participation. Military service becomes a test of citizenship itself. Fail the test, and you lose not just honor but legal standing in the community. Camp life during extended campaigns presents constant dangers beyond enemy action. Thousands of men living in close quarters without adequate sanitation create perfect conditions for epidemic disease. Food poisoning from spoiled rations, accidents with weapons and equipment, and violent disputes between soldiers from different regions kill substantial numbers of troops before they ever engage the enemy. As you strap on your bronze armor and take your place in the phalanx formation, you realize that military service in ancient Greece isn't about heroic individual combat or glorious victory. It's about surviving a system designed to produce maximum casualties while maintaining just enough discipline to accomplish military objectives. Your life now depends on the courage of men you barely know, and their lives depend on yours, in a mutual suicide pact disguised as military strategy. Your military service has given you a taste of organized violence, but it's the intellectual pursuits of ancient Greece that might prove even more dangerous to your long-term survival. Philosophy in the classical world isn't the safe academic exercise you might imagine. It's a high-stakes intellectual game where asking the wrong questions, reaching unpopular conclusions, or simply thinking too independently can lead to exile, imprisonment, or execution. Just ask Socrates, who paid for his philosophical inquiries with a cup of hemlock. The Athenian attitude toward philosophers is deeply ambivalent and potentially lethal. On one hand, the city prides itself on intellectual sophistication and attracts thinkers from across the Greek world. On the other hand, Philosophers have an annoying tendency to question fundamental assumptions about religion, politics, and social order, questioning that makes them extremely dangerous to people in power. Your decision to engage seriously with philosophical ideas means walking a tightrope between intellectual respectability and seditious thinking. The Academy, Plato's famous school of philosophy, isn't the peaceful garden of contemplation you might expect. It's a hotbed of political and religious controversy where students and teachers engage in debates that frequently spill over into accusations of impiety, atheism, and corrupting youth. The curriculum includes mathematics, astronomy, and dialectic, subjects that some consider dangerously subversive because they encourage people to think for themselves rather than accepting traditional authority. Your philosophical education begins with the Socratic method, a system of questioning designed to expose the contradictions and weaknesses in conventional thinking. But practicing this method in public quickly makes you enemies among people who don't appreciate having their beliefs examined too closely. Politicians hate philosophers who question the foundations of political authority. Priests despise thinkers who analyze religious practices rationally, and ordinary citizens resent intellectuals who make them feel ignorant or confused. The charges against Socrates, corrupting youth and introducing new gods, represent the standard accusations leveled against philosophers who become too influential or annoying. These charges are deliberately vague, allowing prosecutors to interpret almost any intellectual activity as evidence of criminal behavior. Teaching young men to think critically becomes corruption, while exploring new ideas about ethics or cosmology becomes introducing false gods that threaten civic harmony. Natural philosophy, what we'd call science, presents particular dangers because it challenges traditional explanations of natural phenomena. Anaxagoras was exiled from Athens for suggesting that the sun is a hot stone rather than a god, while Aristotle fled the city after being accused of impiety following Alexander the Great's death. Even mathematical discoveries can be dangerous. The Pythagoreans reportedly executed members who revealed that irrational numbers exist, considering this knowledge too dangerous for public consumption. The political implications of philosophical thinking make intellectual life a constant minefield. Plato's Republic, with its criticisms of democracy and proposals for philosopher kings, represents exactly the kind of thinking that can get you labeled as an enemy of the state. Even discussing these ideas privately with friends can be dangerous if someone decides to inform authorities about your seditious conversations. The religious dimensions of philosophy create additional hazards for anyone interested in serious thinking. Traditional Greek religion is built on ritual observance rather than theological sophistication, and philosophers who try to develop more rational approaches to understanding the divine often find themselves accused of atheism. The line between philosophical theology and dangerous impiety is thin and constantly shifting based on political circumstances. Different philosophical schools advocate competing approaches to ethics and politics that put their adherents at odds with each other and with conventional society. Stoics preach detachment from worldly concerns, which can be interpreted as lack of patriotism or civic engagement. Epicureans advocate pleasure as the highest good, making them targets for accusations of hedonism and moral corruption. Cynics reject social conventions entirely, earning them reputation as dangerous subversives who threaten civilized order. The process of philosophical education itself carries risks that extend beyond intellectual disagreement. Students frequently become estranged from their families and traditional social networks as their thinking evolves beyond conventional boundaries. Young men who spend too much time studying philosophy often find themselves unmarriageable, unemployable in traditional occupations, and suspected of various forms of moral and political deviance. Economic pressures add practical difficulties to philosophical pursuits. Most serious thinkers depend on wealthy patrons for financial support, creating relationships that can become politically dangerous if patrons fall from favor or back the wrong political factions. Philosophers often find themselves caught between competing benefactors with incompatible political agendas, making intellectual independence virtually impossible to maintain. The international character of philosophical communities creates additional vulnerabilities. Athens attracts thinkers from throughout the Greek world, but foreign philosophers are particularly suspect during periods of political tension. A student from Sparta studying in Athens might find himself accused of espionage, while an Athenian philosopher visiting other cities risks being labeled a potential agent of Athenian imperialism. Historians still argue whether the persecution of philosophers in ancient Greece was primarily political or genuinely religious, but the practical effect was to make serious intellectual work a dangerous occupation that could destroy lives and careers with minimal provocation. The psychological toll of philosophical thinking in such a hostile environment creates its own problems. Many philosophers develop symptoms we'd recognize as chronic anxiety, depression, or paranoia as they struggle to balance intellectual honesty with personal safety. The constant need to self-censor, watch for informers, and calculate the political implications of every idea takes a severe mental health toll that often leads to social isolation and emotional breakdown. The legacy of philosophical persecution extends beyond individual cases to shape the entire intellectual culture of ancient Greece. Potential thinkers learned to avoid certain topics, disguise controversial ideas in obscure language, or simply refrain from engaging with dangerous questions altogether. The result is an intellectual environment where innovation is discouraged and conformity becomes the safest path to survival. As you contemplate joining a philosophical school or engaging seriously with the great questions of existence, ethics, and knowledge, you realize that the life of the mind in ancient Greece requires not just intellectual curiosity but physical courage, political sophistication, and a willingness to risk everything for the sake of understanding. Philosophy isn't just thinking, it's a form of combat where the weapons are ideas and the casualties are measured in exile, imprisonment, and execution. Your philosophical contemplations are interrupted by the harsh realities of economic survival in ancient Greece, where making a living means navigating trade routes infested with pirates, dealing with merchants who consider fraud a business strategy, and risking your life every time you venture beyond the city walls. Commerce in the ancient Mediterranean isn't just challenging. It's a form of armed conflict where economic warfare, literal piracy, and international politics combine to make simple business transactions potentially fatal enterprises. The Piraeus, Athens' bustling port, serves as your introduction to the brutal realities of ancient commerce. Ships from across the Mediterranean dock here carrying everything from Egyptian grain to Black Sea fish, but every cargo represents a successful gamble against pirates, storms, and economic manipulation. The merchants you meet are scarred veterans of commercial warfare, men whose success depends as much on their ability to fight as their skill at negotiation. Your first trading venture involves joining a merchant expedition to Sicily, carrying Athenian pottery and olive oil in exchange for grain and silver. The ship you'll travel on is a sturdy but slow cargo vessel designed to maximize carrying capacity rather than speed or maneuverability. This makes it an ideal target for the pirates who infest every major shipping lane in the Mediterranean, turning commercial voyages into extended games of cat and mouse with armed criminals. Piracy isn't random criminal activity. It's a well-organized industry with networks of bases, supply chains, and intelligence systems that rival legitimate governments. Pirates know shipping schedules, cargo values, and defensive capabilities of merchant vessels before they leave port. They operate from hidden bases on isolated islands where they can repair ships, store stolen goods, and plan future raids with impunity. The crew of your merchant ship includes not just sailors but armed guards hired specifically to fight off pirate attacks. These aren't professional Marines but desperate men willing to risk their lives for modest wages. Former soldiers, escaped slaves, and criminals seeking legitimate employment. Their loyalty depends entirely on continued payment, and their fighting ability is often questionable until tested in actual combat. Your first encounter with pirates occurs 3 days out from Piraeus, when lookouts spot fast-moving vessels approaching from multiple directions. The attack unfolds with terrifying efficiency as pirate ships surround your cargo vessel, their crews shouting threats and demands for surrender. Resistance means certain death for crew and passengers, but surrender often leads to slavery, ransom demands, or execution anyway. The pirate boarding party consists of sundarkened men armed with an assortment of weapons seized from previous victims. They speak multiple languages and show professional efficiency in evaluating cargo, identifying valuable passengers for ransom, and deciding the fate of crew members. Some merchants and passengers are kept alive for their potential value, while others are killed immediately to reduce the number of people requiring food and supervision. Your survival depends partly on luck and partly on your ability to convince the pirates you're worth more alive than dead. Claiming to be wealthy enough to pay ransom might save your life temporarily, but it also means your family faces financial ruin trying to raise the required funds. Pretending to be poor might get you sold into slavery rather than executed, but slavery in pirate-controlled territories often means working yourself to death in conditions that make regular slavery look comfortable. The ransom negotiations that follow capture reveal the sophisticated business operations behind Mediterranean piracy. Pirates maintain agents in major ports who handle communications with victims' families, negotiate payment terms, and arrange exchanges. The process can take months, during which prisoners live in conditions that range from merely uncomfortable to absolutely horrific, depending on their perceived value and the pirate's current mood. Even successful ransom payments don't guarantee safe return. Pirates frequently demand additional payments, sell prisoners to other criminal organizations, or simply kill ransomed individuals to eliminate witnesses who might identify their operations to authorities. The business model depends on maintaining enough successful releases to encourage future ransom payments while eliminating enough witnesses to prevent effective law enforcement. Naval warfare between competing city-states adds another layer of danger to commercial shipping. Merchant vessels become military targets during conflicts, with enemy navies seizing cargoes as spoils of war and imprisoning or executing crew members as enemy combatants. The line between legitimate naval operations and state-sponsored piracy often disappears entirely during periods of intensive warfare. Economic warfare extends beyond direct military action to include deliberate manipulation of trade routes, currency debasement, and coordinated boycotts designed to destroy rival cities' commercial networks. Athens frequently uses its naval power to blockade enemy ports, starving entire populations to achieve political objectives. Merchants caught in these economic conflicts face imprisonment, property confiscation, and sometimes execution as suspected agents of enemy states. The currency systems that facilitate trade create additional opportunities for fraud and exploitation. Different cities mint their own coins with varying silver content, and detecting counterfeit or debased currency requires expertise that most merchants lack. Money changers operate sophisticated fraud schemes, while governments routinely debase their currencies to fund military campaigns, destroying the savings of anyone unlucky enough to hold large quantities of affected coins. Insurance doesn't exist in any modern sense, meaning merchants absorb all losses from piracy, storms, theft, and political seizure. A single failed voyage can bankrupt families and ruin commercial partnerships built over generations. The psychological stress of constant financial risk, combined with physical dangers of travel, creates a merchant class characterized by paranoia, aggression, and ruthless competition. Historians still argue whether ancient Mediterranean commerce was inherently more dangerous than trade in other historical periods, but casualty rates among merchants and commercial travelers suggest that successful business required military skills as much as commercial acumen. Your trading expedition eventually reaches Sicily after surviving 2 more pirate encounters, a severe storm that nearly sank the ship, and a confrontation with Syracusan naval vessels that could have ended in imprisonment or death. The profits from successful cargo sales barely compensate for the risks endured, and you realize that commerce in ancient Greece isn't just about moving goods from place to place. It's about surviving a constant state of economic warfare where business success depends on military victory and commercial failure often means literal destruction. Your successful but harrowing return from Sicily coincides with the beginning of the Panathenea, Athens' most important religious festival, which promises to be a celebration of civic pride, divine honor, and spectacular public violence. Greek festivals aren't sedate religious observances. They're explosive combinations of ritual sacrifice, competitive athletics, dramatic performances, and mass intoxication that regularly result in trampling deaths, ritual murders, and citywide riots that make modern soccer hooliganism look like a polite tea party. The Great Panathenea occurs every 4 years and transforms Athens into a chaotic blend of religious devotion and barely controlled mayhem. Over 100,000 people crowd into the city for the celebrations, creating population densities that strain every system designed to maintain public order. The narrow streets become impassable rivers of humanity where a single stumble can trigger stampedes that kill dozens of people in minutes. Your participation begins with the grand procession that winds through the city carrying a specially woven robe, the peplos, to be presented to Athena's statue in the Parthenon. But this isn't a peaceful parade of worshippers. It's a massive crowd of intoxicated celebrants, excited animals, and heavily armed participants moving through streets barely wide enough to accommodate normal foot traffic. The procession includes hundreds of sacrificial animals, all of which are terrified by the noise and crowds, creating constant dangers from stampeding cattle, kicking horses, and panicked sheep. The sacrificial ceremonies at the Parthenon represent religious devotion on an industrial scale. Over 100 cattle will be slaughtered during the festival, along with countless sheep, goats, and smaller animals. The altar area becomes a literal lake of blood as priests work around the clock to kill animals fast enough to satisfy religious requirements and feed the massive crowds. The smell of blood, burning meat, and decomposing organic matter creates a nauseating cloud that hangs over the entire Acropolis. Athletic competitions during the festival aren't friendly sporting events but brutal contests where death and permanent injury are accepted occupational hazards. The chariot races are particularly lethal, with drivers competing at breakneck speeds around tight turns, while crowds cheer for spectacular crashes. Fallen charioteers are often trampled by following teams, and spectators sometimes join the carnage when crashes send chariots careening into the audience areas. The musical competitions reveal another dark side of Greek cultural life. Performers compete for prizes that can establish careers or destroy reputations, leading to sabotage, bribery, and sometimes physical violence between competing artists. Losing musicians face not just professional disappointment but social exile and economic ruin, creating desperate situations where participants resort to increasingly extreme measures to ensure victory. Wrestling and boxing matches during religious festivals operate under special rules that make them even more dangerous than regular athletic competitions. Festival combat is considered sacred to the gods, meaning that showing mercy or restraining violence might be interpreted as impiety. Fighters are expected to compete until unconsciousness, severe injury, or death, with divine approval measured by the spectacular nature of victories achieved. The drinking that accompanies religious festivals reaches levels that would kill modern participants accustomed to regulated alcohol consumption. Festival wine is often stronger than usual and consumed in quantities that routinely lead to alcohol poisoning. The combination of mass intoxication, religious fervor, and crowded conditions creates perfect storms for violence that can escalate from individual fights to citywide riots within minutes. Women's participation in certain festival activities creates additional dangers related to gender segregation and sexual violence. Female-only religious ceremonies sometimes involve consuming psychoactive substances, engaging in frenzied dancing, or participating in ritual activities that can result in serious injuries. Meanwhile, the temporary suspension of normal social rules during festivals creates opportunities for sexual assault and domestic violence that often go unpunished amid the general chaos. The Dionysiac elements woven throughout Greek festivals celebrate intoxication, sexual license, and temporary reversal of social hierarchies. But these celebrations frequently spiral into genuine lawlessness. Participants under the influence of wine and religious ecstasy engage in behaviors they would never consider during normal circumstances, leading to assaults, thefts, and public disturbances that sometimes require military intervention to control. Economic crimes flourish during festivals when normal commercial regulations are relaxed and crowds of visitors provide abundant opportunities for fraud and theft. Merchants sell contaminated food, watered wine, and counterfeit goods to festival attendees who are too intoxicated or excited to notice. Pickpockets and confidence artists work the crowds systematically, while prostitutes and their associates rob clients who are too drunk to resist or too embarrassed to report the crimes. The temporary structures erected for festival activities, grandstands, viewing platforms, and vendor stalls are built quickly with minimal attention to safety standards. Collapses are common, especially when crowds surge against railings or supports during exciting moments in competitions. The wooden structures also create fire hazards when combined with numerous torches, oil lamps, and sacrificial fires burning throughout the festival area. Historians still argue whether the violence and chaos associated with Greek festivals was intentional religious expression, or simply the inevitable result of combining large crowds with alcohol and competitive activities. But casualty reports suggest the distinction was irrelevant to victims. Religious rivalries between different cults and city-states often explode into open conflict during major festivals when representatives from competing religious traditions are forced into close proximity. Disputes over ceremonial precedents, ritual procedures, or theological interpretations can escalate into sectarian violence that spreads beyond the immediate participants to engulf entire communities in religious warfare. The aftermath of major festivals reveals the true cost of these celebrations in human terms. Cleanup crews collect dozens of bodies from trampling, violence, and alcohol poisoning, while hospitals treat hundreds of injured participants. Property damage from riots, fires, and vandalism can take months to repair, and the social tensions generated by festival conflicts often persist long after the celebrations end. As you survive another day of festival activities, dodging stampeding sacrificial animals, avoiding drunken brawls, and steering clear of collapsing temporary structures, you realize that Greek religious festivals represent civilization's attempt to channel humanity's most destructive impulses into socially acceptable forms of violence and chaos. The gods may be honored, but the price is measured in blood, broken bones, and shattered lives of mortals who mistake religious enthusiasm for personal safety. The festival chaos has barely subsided when you find yourself summoned to the Areopagus, the ancient court that handles the most serious criminal cases in Athens. Your commercial dealings during the recent trading expedition have apparently attracted legal attention, and you're about to discover that Greek justice isn't the rational, fair-minded legal system you might expect from the civilization that gave us democracy. Instead, it's a brutal arena where legal procedures combine with religious ritual, political manipulation, and physical violence to create a judicial system that's almost as likely to kill innocent defendants as guilty ones. The Areopagus meets at dawn on a rocky hill northwest of the Acropolis, a deliberately intimidating location where the ancient stones seem to whisper of the countless men who face judgment and execution on this spot. The court itself is an open-air amphitheater where weather conditions can influence legal proceedings, Rain, wind, and extreme temperatures affect both judges' comfort and defendants' ability to present coherent arguments. Your trial is scheduled for a day when the hot Mediterranean sun will beat down mercilessly on everyone involved. The charges against you stem from accusations that you violated sacred commercial laws by trading with enemies of Athens during your recent voyage to Sicily. In Greek law, the line between commercial crime and treason is virtually non-existent, and the penalties for both can include death, exile, or property confiscation. Your accuser is a rival merchant who stands to benefit financially if you're eliminated from competition, but personal motives don't invalidate legal charges in a system where accusation often equals conviction. The jury pool consists of several hundred male citizens selected by lot, but these aren't impartial arbiters seeking truth. They're political actors whose decisions reflect factional loyalties, personal prejudices, and economic interests. Many jurors have existing relationships with the parties involved, while others hope to gain favor with powerful political figures by voting in ways that advance particular agendas. Justice is negotiable, and the outcome often depends more on political connections than legal evidence. Your legal representation consists of yourself and whatever friends are willing to speak on your behalf, because professional lawyers don't exist in ancient Greece. Legal expertise is considered a form of dangerous specialization that threatens democratic equality, the theory being that all citizens should be equally capable of presenting legal arguments. In practice, this means that articulate, well-connected defendants have enormous advantages over those who lack rhetorical skills or political allies. The prosecution's case against you relies heavily on testimony from slaves who've been tortured to ensure their honesty. Greek law assumes that slaves will lie unless physically coerced, so their testimony is only admissible after they've been subjected to systematic torture designed to break their will to deceive. The torture sessions are conducted by professional specialists who use techniques refined over generations to maximize pain, while keeping victims conscious and capable of speech. Your own slaves face the same treatment if you decide to present their testimony in your defense. Watching men who've served your household for years being systematically tortured to provide evidence for your legal case creates a moral dilemma that has no good solutions. Refuse to use their testimony, and you lose potentially crucial evidence. Allow the torture, and you become complicit in destroying people who depend on your protection. The religious elements of Greek legal procedure add supernatural dimensions to earthly justice. Oaths sworn before the gods carry binding spiritual force that's considered more reliable than human testimony, but perjury brings divine punishment that can destroy entire families. Defendants and witnesses alike risk not just legal penalties but cosmic retribution for false statements, creating psychological pressures that can drive people to confess to crimes they didn't commit rather than risk divine wrath. Trial by ordeal remains an option for certain types of cases, where defendants can prove their innocence by surviving physically dangerous tests supposedly controlled by divine intervention. These might involve drinking poison that will kill the guilty while sparing the innocent, walking through fire that will burn liars but leave truth-tellers unharmed, or swimming in sacred waters that will drown the impure while buoying the righteous. The survival rates for these ordeals suggest that divine intervention is less reliable than legal propaganda claims. The voting process itself reflects the brutal simplicity of Greek justice. Jurors cast bronze tokens into urns designated for conviction or acquittal, with no possibility for nuanced verdicts or graduated punishments. You're either completely innocent or completely guilty, with no middle ground for partial responsibility, mitigating circumstances, or alternative explanations. The winner-take-all system means that narrow victories carry the same legal weight as overwhelming mandates. Penalties for serious crimes reflect a society that values deterrence over rehabilitation or proportional punishment. Property confiscation can reduce wealthy families to destitution overnight, while exile destroys social connections and economic opportunities that took generations to build. Execution methods include drinking hemlock, being thrown from cliffs, or more elaborate punishments designed to honor particular gods while teaching lessons to potential criminals. The appeals process is virtually non-existent, meaning that verdicts rendered by possibly corrupt, definitely biased juries become permanent legal facts within hours of being announced. New evidence, procedural errors, or revealed perjury rarely provide grounds for overturning convictions, and the finality of Greek justice means that wrongful convictions destroy lives without possibility of redemption or compensation. Historians still argue whether Greek legal procedures were designed to discover truth or simply to provide socially acceptable methods for resolving conflicts through ritualized violence, but conviction rates suggest that the system functioned more effectively as a tool of social control than as a mechanism for achieving justice. Your trial unfolds over a single day, with prosecution and defense presentations limited to time periods measured by water clocks that ensure equal speaking opportunities but prevent thorough examination of complex evidence. The pace is relentless, the stakes are ultimate, and the outcome depends on factors largely beyond your control. Political wins, personal grudges, and random chance disguised as divine will. As the bronze voting tokens clatter into the urns and officials begin counting the results that will determine whether you live free, die in exile, or face execution, you realize that Greek justice represents civilization's attempt to domesticate humanity's violent impulses by channeling them through legal procedures that maintain the appearance of rationality while preserving the essential brutality that societies apparently require to maintain order. The bronze tokens have been counted, and by the narrowest of margins, just 7 votes, you've been acquitted of the charges that could have meant exile or death. But as the afternoon sun begins its descent toward the horizon, painting the marble columns of the Acropolis in shades of gold and crimson, you realize that surviving your trial was only the latest in a series of near-fatal encounters that defined daily existence in ancient Greece. Your 24 hours in this celebrated civilization have been a relentless gauntlet of disease, violence, political intrigue, and social brutality that makes simple survival an achievement worthy of epic poetry. The walk home from the Areopagus takes you through streets still bearing the scars of yesterday's festival violence. Bloodstains on marble steps, broken pottery scattered across walkways, and the lingering smell of smoke from fires that burned through the night. Citizens you pass you with mixtures of curiosity and suspicion, already aware of your legal troubles and calculating how your narrow escape might affect their own political and commercial relationships. In Athens, today's acquitted defendant might become tomorrow's exile, and social dynamics shift constantly based on perceived changes in individual fortunes. Your household slaves greet your return with relief that's obviously genuine but carefully modulated to avoid appearing too familiar with their master. They've spent the day uncertain whether they would soon be sold to pay legal fees, punished for your supposed crimes, or simply abandoned if you were convicted and exiled. The precariousness of your position extends to everyone connected with you, creating ripple effects of anxiety and insecurity that touch dozens of lives beyond your own. The evening meal, prepared from ingredients purchased at inflated prices from merchants who knew about your legal troubles, tastes of survival rather than celebration. The bread is coarser than usual, the wine more watered, and the olive oil carries a hint of rancidity that suggests your household budget has already been strained by legal expenses. Even acquittal comes with financial costs that will affect your family's living standards for months or years to come. As darkness settles over Athens, bringing blessed relief from the Mediterranean heat, you reflect on the cascading series of life-threatening challenges that have defined your ancient Greek adventure. The contaminated breakfast that could have killed you with food poisoning, the brutal gymnasium training that left you bloodied and bruised, the political assembly where a single wrong word might have meant ostracism, the religious obligations that demanded constant vigilance against divine retribution. Each represented a separate test of survival skills that modern humans rarely need to develop. The medical treatment you received for minor injuries demonstrated how seeking help often created more dangers than the original problems. The bloodletting that weakened you, the herbal remedies that might have been poisonous, the unsanitary conditions that invited infection, all reminded you that ancient medicine was often indistinguishable from systematic torture disguised as healing. Your encounters with the institution of slavery revealed the moral compromises required to function in a society built on human exploitation. Every comfort, every convenience, every moment of leisure depended on the systematic brutalization of people whose only crime was being born into the wrong circumstances or captured during military campaigns. The psychological damage of living in such a system affects masters almost as much as slaves, creating pathological dependencies and moral blindness that corrupts entire civilizations. The position of women in Greek society provided constant reminders of how survival odds varied dramatically based on factors completely beyond individual control. Being born female in ancient Greece meant facing mortality rates, legal restrictions, and social limitations that made simple survival into young adulthood a noteworthy achievement requiring exceptional luck and family protection. The theatrical performances you attended demonstrated how cultural activities became vehicles for political manipulation and social control rather than simple entertainment. Every artistic expression carried potential legal and social consequences that could destroy careers, families, and lives based on audience interpretation of dramatic content. Military service revealed the brutal reality behind Greek military success. Hoplite warfare was essentially organized suicide that achieved strategic objectives through sheer willingness to accept massive casualties. The training, equipment, and combat techniques were designed to maximize lethality rather than preserve individual lives, creating a military culture where survival depended more on luck than skill. Philosophical pursuits, supposedly the glory of Greek intellectual achievement, carried risks that could prove fatal to anyone who asked inconvenient questions or reached unpopular conclusions. The execution of Socrates wasn't an aberration but a logical consequence of a system that punished independent thinking whenever it threatened established authority. Commercial activities meant navigating networks of pirates, fraudulent merchants, and political manipulation that made simple business transactions into life-or-death gambles. Success in trade required military skills as much as commercial expertise, and failure often meant not just financial ruin but literal destruction. Religious festivals, designed to honor the gods and strengthen community bonds, regularly produced casualties that would shock modern emergency responders. The combination of mass intoxication, competitive violence, and overcrowding created perfect conditions for trampling deaths, structural collapses, and riots that could engulf entire cities. The legal system promised justice but delivered verdicts based more on political connections and personal vendettas than evidence or legal principles. Trials became elaborate rituals where predetermined outcomes were disguised as rational deliberation, and defendants survived more through luck than legal merit. Historians still argue whether ancient Greek civilization achieved greatness despite its brutality or because of it, but your personal experience suggests that the philosophical achievements, artistic innovations, and political experiments that we celebrate today were purchased with human suffering on a scale that's difficult to comprehend from our modern perspective. As you prepare for sleep on your straw mattress, listening to the sounds of a city that never truly rests, distant voices from taverns, the barking of feral dogs, the occasional scream that might indicate violence or simply someone's nightmare, you realize that surviving 24 hours in ancient Greece required not just physical endurance but psychological resilience, political sophistication, and moral flexibility that tested the limits of human adaptability. The oil lamp flickering beside your bed casts dancing shadows on the rough plastered walls, and in those shadows you can almost see the faces of all the people who didn't survive their encounters with ancient Greek civilization. The slaves worked to death in silver mines, the women who died in childbirth, the soldiers who fell in phalanx formations, the philosophers who drank hemlock, the merchants who disappeared on pirate-infested seas, and the countless ordinary citizens who simply couldn't navigate the deadly complexities of daily life in a society that valued abstract ideals more than individual human survival. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new opportunities for fatal mistakes, and new tests of your ability to survive in a world where democracy and slavery, philosophy and brutality, artistic beauty and casual violence coexist in combinations that reveal both the heights and depths of human civilization. But for now, in this moment of temporary safety, you can close your eyes and appreciate the simple miracle of having lived through another day in ancient Greece. An achievement that millions of your contemporaries will never manage to repeat. The soft Mediterranean breeze carries the scent of olive groves and salt water through your window, mixing with the ever-present urban odors of human habitation, and as consciousness fades towards sleep, you carry with you the hard-won knowledge that survival itself is perhaps the greatest philosophical achievement any human being can accomplish in a world designed to test the limits of mortal endurance. Sweet dreams, if the gods allow them, for tomorrow the trials begin again, and in ancient Greece, there are no guarantees that today's survivor will see another sunset.